The crowd's voices rose like a wall of thunder outside Xavier Nolan's cabin, their torches painting the twilight orange, and every single face he had known since childhood was twisted with fear and rage as they demanded. He cast out the wounded orc woman bleeding on his floor. Xavier's hand tightened on the iron doorknob, his knuckles white, and for one long moment he met the eyes of Mayor Garrett, of Widow Simmons, of every neighbor who had ever shared his table or borrowed his plow, before he stepped backward into his home and turned the heavy lock with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire valley. The shouting outside intensified, fists pounding on the thick oak door, but Xavier did not turn around. He stood there, breathing hard, feeling the weight of what he had just done settle onto his shoulders like a yoke. Behind him, he could hear the shallow, pained breathing of the orc woman where she lay near his fireplace, wrapped in the old blanket he had thrown over her when he first found her collapsed at the edge of his wheat field 3 hours ago. "You are a fool," she said, her voice rough and accented but clear. "They will burn this place down with both of us inside." Xavier finally turned to look at her. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps close to his own 24 years, though it was hard to tell with orcs. Her skin was a deep green, darker than spring leaves, and her black hair was matted with blood from the wound on her shoulder. 2 small tusks jutted up from her lower jaw, and her amber eyes watched him with a mixture of pain, confusion, and something that might have been gratitude. "They won't," Xavier said, though he was not entirely certain. "They're angry now, but they're not murderers. They'll cool down." "You do not know that," she said. She tried to sit up and failed, falling back against the stone hearth with a grunt of pain. "You should have let them take me. I was as good as dead anyway." Xavier crossed to where she lay and knelt down, examining the wound on her shoulder more carefully now that he had light and time. It was a deep gash made by a blade, and it had bled heavily enough to soak through her rough spun tunic. He had done basic field medicine during his years in the border militia, patching up men who had taken orc arrows or sword cuts, and he knew this wound was serious but not fatal if he could stop the bleeding and keep infection away. "What's your name?" he asked as he stood and moved to his kitchen, gathering clean cloth, his needle and thread, and the bottle of harsh grain alcohol he kept for emergencies. She was silent for a long moment. Outside, the shouting had died down somewhat, though he could still hear voices arguing in his yard. "Kragha," she finally said. "My name is Kragha." "I'm Xavier," he said, returning to her side with his supplies. "This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts," Kragha said, but there was a grim humor in her voice. "Do what you must." He worked as carefully as he could, cleaning the wound first with water from his well, then pouring the alcohol over it. Kragha hissed through her teeth but did not cry out, her hands clenched into fists against the floorboards. The cut was clean, at least not ragged, and he was able to stitch it closed with steady hands despite the continued noise from outside his cabin. "Why?" Kragha asked as he tied off the final stitch. "Why did you lock them out? I am your enemy. My people have killed humans. I have killed humans." Xavier sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on a spare cloth. That was the question, was it not? Why had he done it? When he found her in his field, his first instinct had been to fetch his rifle. Orcs did not come to the valley alone unless they were scouts for a raid, and the last raid had been only 2 years ago, leaving 4 families dead and half the town's grain stores burned. But she had not attacked him. She had not even reached for the crude knife at her belt. She had simply looked at him with those amber eyes, pain and resignation in every line of her face, and said, "Make it quick." He had not made it quick. He had lifted her up, all muscled strength and deadweight, and carried her to his cabin. He had not even fully understood what he was doing until the town had gathered, drawn by the sight of him carrying an orc through the main road, and begun their shouting. "You were hurt," Xavier said finally. "That's reason enough." Kragha made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "That is not reason enough for any human I have ever met." "Then you have not met the right humans," Xavier said. He stood and moved to the window, carefully pulling back the edge of the curtain to look outside. The crowd had thinned considerably. Perhaps 20 people remained, standing in small clusters, their torches burning low. Mayor Garrett was still there, talking in low, urgent tones with the town's blacksmith and the captain of the local militia. They would come back in the morning, Xavier knew. They would not let this stand. But for tonight, at least, he had bought some time. He let the curtain fall and turned back to Kragha. She had managed to prop herself up against the stone of the hearth, and though her face was pale beneath the green of her skin, her eyes were alert and watching him carefully. "You have food?" she asked. "Water, both," Xavier said. He realized with a start that he had not eaten since noon and the sun was now fully set. His stomach growled in agreement. "Can you eat bread and cheese?" "I can eat anything that does not eat me first," Kragha said. "My people are not particular." Xavier found himself almost smiling at that as he moved to his small kitchen and began pulling out food. His cabin was not large, just 3 rooms. This main living area with the fireplace and kitchen, a bedroom and a small storage room. It was more than enough for a single man working a wheat farm at the edge of the valley. But with another person present, especially one who was supposed to be his enemy, it felt suddenly cramped. He brought her bread and hard cheese, along with a cup of water from his well, and watched as she ate with the focused intensity of someone who had not had a meal in days. He took his own portion and sat in his old wooden chair near the fireplace, not quite comfortable with sitting on the floor beside her, not quite able to leave her alone. "How did you get hurt?" he asked after a while. Kragha finished chewing before she answered. "My clan was attacked." "By your people, not by accident or in battle, but in the night while we slept. They killed the children first so they would not warn the warriors." Her voice was flat, emotionless, but her hands shook slightly as she raised the cup to her lips. "I fought, I ran. I do not know if anyone else survived." Xavier felt something cold settle in his stomach. "When was this?" 3 days ago, maybe 4. "I ran south, away from the mountains. I did not know where else to go." 3 days ago, there had been talk in the town of a militia expedition into the northern mountains, led by some of the hotheads who believed the only good orc was a dead orc. Xavier had not gone, had not even been invited, because everyone knew his views on unnecessary violence. He had done his service, had killed when he had to during actual raids, but he had no stomach for seeking out orc camps and slaughtering them in their beds. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "That should not have happened." Kragha looked at him sharply. "Do not apologize for what you did not do. It makes you seem weak." "Maybe I am weak," Xavier said, meeting her eyes. "The strong ones are outside, ready to kill you for the crime of being born orc." Something shifted in Kragha's expression, a softening around the eyes, though her voice remained hard. "You are not weak. You are just a different kind of strong, the kind that locks doors instead of opening them to mobs." They sat in silence after that, listening to the last of the crowd outside disperse. Xavier added wood to the fire as the night grew colder, and eventually he brought a pillow and another blanket from his bedroom, helping Kragha arrange herself more comfortably on the floor. She was asleep within minutes, her breathing evening out into a steady rhythm. Xavier did not sleep. He sat in his chair, his old militia rifle across his lap, and watched the door. He did not truly believe his neighbors would attack in the night, but he had been wrong about people before. The hatred in their faces had been real, and fear could make people do terrible things. Morning came cold and gray, with frost on the windows. Kragha woke with a start, her hand going to the knife at her belt before she seemed to remember where she was. Xavier had dozed off sometime before dawn, and he jerked awake at her movement, the rifle nearly sliding from his lap. "Still alive," Kragha said. There was something almost like relief in her voice. "I half expected to wake in flames." "The night is young," Xavier said dryly, then winced. "That was supposed to be a joke." "It was a bad one," Kragha said, but the corner of her mouth twitched upward slightly. "How is your door?" "Still in one piece." Xavier stood and stretched, his back protesting from the awkward position he had slept in, and moved to the door. He opened it a crack and looked outside. The yard was empty of people, but someone had left something on his doorstep. He opened the door wider and looked down at the collection of items. A dead rat nailed to a board, a circle of stones that was probably meant to be some kind of curse or warning, and a note written in an angry, slashing hand. "You have 1 week to get rid of it, or we will do it for you. This is your only warning." Xavier crumpled the note and threw it into the fireplace, then kicked the rat and stones off his porch. Kragha was watching him from her position by the hearth, her expression unreadable. "1 week," she said. "That is more time than I expected. I will be well enough to travel in 3 or 4 days. You can tell them I left." "And where will you go?" Xavier asked, closing the door and turning to face her. "Back north to the mountains where your clan was killed, further south into human lands where you will be hunted on sight. East to the wild forests where the dire wolves hunt, west to the sea cliffs and the storms." Kragha's jaw tightened. "That is not your concern." "You made it my concern when you collapsed in my field," Xavier said. He was surprised by the heat in his own voice. "I locked that door." "That means something." "It means you are a fool with a kind heart," Kragha said. "That is all it means. Do not pretend you have some great plan to save me, human. I am not a wounded bird you can nurse back to health and release." Xavier opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She was right, in a way. He had no plan. He had acted on instinct, on the simple conviction that leaving her to die or to be killed by the mob was wrong, but he had not thought beyond that moment. What did he intend to do? Keep her hidden in his cabin forever? Sneak her out in the middle of the night and hope she survived the wilderness alone? "I will figure something out," he said finally. "But for now, you need to heal. That wound could still fester if you push yourself too hard." Kragha looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she just nodded slowly. "Very well, but if they come back before the week is up, you will let me out the back. I will not have your death on my conscience." "Orcs have consciences," Xavier said, then immediately regretted it. "I am sorry." "That was true," Kragha said with a bitter smile. "According to your people, we are monsters without souls or feelings. But yes, Xavier who locks doors, we have consciences. Sometimes I wish we did not." The days that followed fell into a strange routine. Xavier continued his work on the farm as much as he could, though he noticed that none of his neighbors came by to borrow tools or share news as they usually did. He was being shunned, quietly and thoroughly, and he felt the weight of that isolation more than he had expected. Inside the cabin, Kragha healed quickly. Orcs were tough, Xavier learned, their bodies recovering from injury faster than humans. By the 3rd day, she was able to stand and walk around the cabin, though she still favored her injured shoulder. She insisted on helping with small tasks, mending a torn shirt for him, stirring the stew he made for dinner, organizing his chaotic storage room. They talked, slowly at first, about small things. Xavier told her about the farm, about how he had inherited it from his uncle who died in a raid 5 years ago. Kragha told him about life in the orc clans, about how they moved with the seasons, following game and avoiding human settlements. She described the mountains as beautiful and harsh, a place where only the strong survived, but where there was a kind of freedom she had never felt anywhere else. "Did you have family?" Xavier asked one evening as they sat by the fire, eating a dinner of roasted root vegetables and the last of his salted pork. Kragha was quiet for a long moment. "A brother," she said finally. "Younger. He wanted to be a great warrior like our father." She stared into the fire. "I do not know if he survived the attack. I did not see him among the dead, but I did not see everyone." Xavier wanted to offer comfort but did not know how. Instead, he said, "My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week of each other. My uncle raised me, taught me to farm and to fight. He was a hard man but fair." "And now you are alone," Kragha said. "It was not a question." "Now I am alone," Xavier agreed. "Or I was, until a stubborn orc decided to bleed in my wheat field." Kragha snorted, a sound that was surprisingly human. "I did not decide to bleed anywhere. Bleeding just happened." "Still your fault," Xavier said, and was rewarded with another almost smile. On the 5th day, Mayor Garrett came alone to the cabin. Xavier saw him approaching from the window and went out to meet him, not wanting Kragha to overhear whatever threats or ultimatums were coming. The mayor was a gray-haired man of 50, his face lined from years of sun and worry. He had been a friend of Xavier's uncle, and he had always been fair to Xavier, even when they disagreed. But now his face was hard, his eyes cold. "2 more days, Xavier," he said without preamble. "Then we come in and remove that creature whether you like it or not." "She has a name," Xavier said. "And she is no threat to anyone. She is one wounded woman, alone and far from home." "She is an orc," Garrett said flatly. "And orcs killed my daughter in the last raid. They killed the Potter children and old Ben Marsh and half a dozen others. You remember that? Or has your mercy made you forget?" Xavier felt anger flare in his chest. "I remember. I was there when we found the bodies. I helped bury them. But Kragha did not kill them. She was not even there. Punishing her for what other orcs did is no different than them punishing human prisoners for what we do." "It is not about punishment," Garrett said, his voice rising. "It is about safety. As long as that thing is in this town, we are at risk. What if she is a scout? What if she signals her clan to attack?" "Her clan is dead," Xavier said quietly. "Killed by humans in a night raid." "She is the only survivor." Garrett's expression flickered, something that might have been shame or doubt crossing his face, but it was gone in an instant. "That is not our problem. Our problem is keeping this town safe. 2 more days, Xavier. After that, you will have to choose between her and your place in this community." He left without waiting for a response, and Xavier stood in his yard for a long time, watching the clouds move across the sky. When he went back inside, Kragha was standing near the window, and he knew she had heard everything. "You should let me go," she said. "Tonight, I am strong enough now to go where?" Xavier asked the same question he had asked before. "Does it matter?" Kragha's voice was sharp. "I will not let you sacrifice your life here for me. You have a home, land, a place in this world. I have nothing. The choice is obvious." "The choice is mine to make," Xavier said. He moved to stand in front of her, looking up slightly to meet her eyes. She was taller than him by a few inches, broader in the shoulders, and there were scars on her arms and hands that spoke of a life of fighting. But in that moment, she looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, and her voice was no longer sharp but confused, almost pleading. "You do not know me. I am nothing to you. Why would you give up everything for a stranger, for an orc?" Xavier did not have a good answer. Or rather, he had several answers and he was not sure which one was true. Because it was the right thing to do. Because he was tired of hatred and violence. Because when he looked at her, he did not see a monster but a person, complex and real and worth saving. Because when she had smiled at his bad joke, something in his chest had tightened in a way he did not fully understand. Because I looked at you and saw someone worth locking the door for, he said finally. It was not a complete answer, but it was true as far as it went. Kragha stared at him for a long moment, and something in her expression cracked open. She reached out hesitantly and touched his shoulder with one large, scarred hand. "You are a fool," she said, but there was no bite in the words. "A stubborn, kind fool." "Then we match," Xavier said. "You are a stubborn, irritating orc who bled all over my floor and will not leave when she should." Kragha's hand tightened on his shoulder, and then suddenly she was pulling him forward into an embrace that was awkward and fierce. Xavier froze for a moment, surprised by the sudden contact, then slowly brought his arms up to return the gesture. She was warm and solid against him, and he could feel the tension in her muscles, the rapid beat of her heart. They stood like that for several breaths, neither speaking, and Xavier felt something shift between them, a connection forming that was deeper than gratitude or simple kindness. When Kragha finally pulled back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I do not want you to lose your home for me," she said quietly. "But I do not want to leave either. Is that selfish?" "Probably," Xavier said. "But I am being selfish too. I do not want you to go." They spent that night making plans. Xavier had an idea, risky and possibly foolish, but better than simply waiting for the town to come and take Kragha by force. In the morning, he would go to Mayor Garrett and make a proposal. Kragha would stay, but she would work for her keep. She would help Xavier with the farm, proving through her actions that she was no threat. If after a season the town still wanted her gone, she would leave without resistance. It was not a perfect plan. Kragha pointed out several flaws, chief among them that the town might not agree to any proposal that involved her staying. But it was something, a chance, and that was more than they had before. Xavier slept fitfully that night, his dreams full of fire and shouting voices. He woke before dawn to find Kragha already awake, sitting by the window and watching the lightening sky. "You should eat something before you go," she said without looking at him. "You think better on a full stomach." They shared a simple breakfast of porridge and dried fruit, not talking much, both of them tense with anticipation. When the sun was fully up, Xavier put on his cleanest shirt and his uncle's old coat, trying to look respectable and reasonable rather than like a man who had been harboring the town's enemy for nearly a week. "If this goes badly," Kragha said as he reached for the door, "you run. You do not try to fight them all." "I will run only if you run with me," Xavier said. He tried to smile, but it came out shaky. "We are in this together now." The walk to Mayor Garrett's house felt longer than it should have. People saw him coming and turned away, going into their houses or suddenly finding urgent business elsewhere. Mrs. Holloway, who had always been kind to him, actually pulled her children inside and shut the door as he passed. It stung more than he wanted to admit. Mayor Garrett was outside his house, chopping wood for the coming winter. He saw Xavier approaching and stopped, setting the axe aside and wiping sweat from his brow. "Come to turn her over?" he asked without preamble. "Come to make a proposal," Xavier said. He forced his voice to stay steady, to sound confident even though his heart was racing. "Give her a chance. 1 season. She will work my farm, stay on my land, prove that she is no threat. If at the end of the season you still want her gone, she will go without resistance." Garrett shook his head before Xavier even finished speaking. "No, that is not acceptable. We want her gone now." "Why?" Xavier demanded. "What harm has she done? She has been in my cabin for 6 days and nothing bad has happened. No raids, no attacks, nothing." You are punishing her for crimes she did not commit. I am protecting this town, Garrett said, his voice hard. You are young, Xavier. You do not remember the bad years when the orc raids came every season and we lost more than we could spare. Your uncle fought in those years. He understood that orcs and humans cannot coexist. My uncle taught me to judge people by their actions, not their blood, Xavier shot back. And Kragha's actions have been nothing but peaceful. Because she is trapped and outnumbered, Garrett said. What happens when she is not? What happens when she heals fully and decides to take revenge for her clan? You think your kindness will protect you? Yes, Xavier said simply. I do, because she is not what you think she is. She is not a monster. She is just a person trying to survive in a world that wants her dead for no reason other than what she is. Garrett was silent for a long moment, studying Xavier's face. Finally, he sighed, and some of the hardness left his expression. You really care about her, do not you? This is not just about being contrary or proving a point. Xavier hesitated, then nodded. I care about her. She matters to me. Then you are a bigger fool than I thought, Garrett said, but there was something almost like pity in his voice now. But you are also your uncle's nephew, and he was a good man even when he was being stubborn. I will put your proposal to the town council. If they agree, the orc can stay for 1 season. But Xavier, if anything goes wrong, if there is even a hint of trouble from her or because of her, she leaves immediately, and you might have to leave with her. I understand, Xavier said. Thank you. He walked back to his cabin feeling lighter than he had in days. It was not a perfect solution, and there would be resistance, but it was a chance. That was all he had asked for. Kragha was pacing when he entered, her nervous energy filling the small space. She whirled to face him as the door opened, her hand on her knife, then relaxed when she saw it was him. Well, she demanded. He is going to put it to the council, Xavier said. 1 season. You work with me on the farm, prove you are not a threat, and at the end they decide if you can stay or if you have to go. Kragha stared at him, her expression cycling through disbelief, hope, and fear in rapid succession. They agreed to this. Not yet, Xavier admitted. But Garrett will recommend it. That counts for something. It counts for nothing if the council says no, Kragha said. But despite her words, there was hope in her eyes, fragile and uncertain but real. The council meeting was held 2 days later, and Xavier was summoned to attend. He left Kragha at the cabin with instructions to bar the door and not open it for anyone but him. She had argued, wanting to come with him, but he had convinced her that her presence would only inflame tensions. The meeting was held in the town's small assembly hall, a building that usually hosted harvest festivals and wedding celebrations, but now felt oppressive and hostile. The council consisted of Mayor Garrett, the town's 3 elders, the militia captain, and the priest from the local church. Xavier stood before them, feeling very much like a criminal on trial. Xavier Nolan, Mayor Garrett began formally, you stand accused of harboring an enemy of this community, of risking the safety of your neighbors for personal reasons, and of defying the direct orders of your mayor and council. How do you answer these charges? Xavier took a deep breath. I do not deny that I have sheltered Kragha, the orc woman who was injured and seeking refuge, but I deny that she is an enemy. She has done no harm to anyone in this town. She was wounded, alone, and dying. I gave her aid because it was the right thing to do, because we are better than mindless hatred and prejudice. Better, Elder Thompson snarled. He was the oldest member of the council, nearly 70, and had lost his son to an orc raid 20 years ago. You call us prejudiced because we want to protect ourselves from monsters. I call you prejudiced because you judge her without knowing her, Xavier said, meeting the old man's eyes. Because you see green skin and tusks and assume evil. That is the definition of prejudice. She is an orc, Father Benedict said quietly. He was a younger man, relatively new to the town, and had always been kind to Xavier. The church teaches that orcs are soulless creatures, made by dark magic to torment humanity. The church also teaches mercy and compassion, Xavier countered. And I have seen Kragha show both. She has a conscience, she feels pain and loss, she grieves for her dead clan. Those are not the traits of a soulless monster. The militia captain, a scarred veteran named Pierce, leaned forward. What you are asking is impossible, boy. We cannot allow an orc to live among us. The risk is too great. What risk? Xavier demanded. She is one woman, injured and alone. I am not asking you to welcome an entire clan into your homes. I am asking for one season to prove that she can live peacefully among us. If she fails, if there is any trouble, she leaves. But if she succeeds, then maybe we can start to imagine a future where humans and orcs are not always at war. That is a naive dream, Elder Thompson said. Orcs and humans have been enemies since the beginning of time. One friendly orc will not change that. It is a start, Xavier said, and starts matter. My uncle always said that if we do not try to be better than we were, we are just choosing to be worse. Mayor Garrett cleared his throat. The proposal is this. Kragha remains on Xavier's land for one season, working the farm and proving through her actions that she is no threat. At the end of the season, we reconvene and decide whether she may stay permanently or must leave. Xavier accepts full responsibility for her actions and agrees that any trouble she causes will result in immediate expulsion for both of them. There was a long silence as the council members looked at each other. Finally, Father Benedict spoke. I will support this proposal. Mercy is never wrong, even when it is difficult. I oppose it, Elder Thompson said immediately. We are inviting disaster. The other two elders conferred quietly, then one of them, Elder Sarah, spoke. I will support it, but with the condition that the orc woman must appear before us at the end of each month to report on her progress. We will not simply take Xavier's word. That is acceptable, Xavier said quickly, before anyone could object. Captain Pierce looked grim but nodded slowly. I will support it as well, though I think we are making a mistake. But Xavier is right that he has served this town well, and he deserves a chance to prove his point. That left only Elder Thompson opposed, and the proposal passed by a vote of 4-1. Xavier felt relief wash over him so strongly that his knees nearly buckled. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You will not regret this. We had better not, Mayor Garrett said. Because if we do, Xavier, it will be your head as well as hers. Remember that. Xavier ran most of the way back to his cabin, eager to tell Kragha the news. He burst through the door, startling her where she sat sharpening her knife by the fire, and barely managed to gasp out the words. They agreed. 1 season. You can stay. Kragha dropped the knife and whetstone, staring at him in disbelief. They actually agreed. They agreed, Xavier confirmed. He was grinning like an idiot, he knew, but he could not help it. You have to appear before them monthly to report, and if there is any trouble you have to leave immediately, but you can stay. We have a chance. Kragha stood slowly, and for a moment she just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides and pulled him into another embrace, this one even fiercer than before. Thank you, she whispered against his hair. Thank you for fighting for me. No one has ever done that before. Xavier returned the embrace, his arms wrapping around her waist, and allowed himself to feel the full weight of his relief and joy. They had won, at least for now. The future was uncertain, but they had time, and that was everything. The next months were both harder and easier than Xavier had expected. The work was easier because Kragha was incredibly strong and tireless, able to do the labor of 2 men without complaint. She learned quickly, adapting to farm work with the same focus she must have once applied to warfare. Together, they repaired the barn roof before the first snows, brought in the last of the harvest, and prepared the fields for winter. But the social aspect was much harder. The town did not warm to Kragha's presence. When they went into town for supplies, people stared openly, some with hostility, some with fear, and some with a curiosity they tried to hide. Children pointed and whispered. Women pulled their skirts aside as if Kragha might contaminate them. Men put hands on weapons just in case. Kragha endured it with stoic dignity, never responding to the insults or the fear, simply doing what needed to be done and leaving as quickly as possible. But Xavier could see the toll it took, the way her shoulders tightened and her jaw clenched, the way she was silent for hours after each trip to town. "They will come around," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire, winter wind howling outside. "Once they see that you mean no harm, they will accept you." "You are an optimist," Kragha said, but there was fondness in her voice. "I do not think they will ever truly accept me. I am too different, too much a reminder of their losses and fears." "Then they are fools," Xavier said. He was sitting closer to her than he once would have, their shoulders nearly touching. Over the weeks, the physical space between them had gradually diminished, a slow closing of distance that felt natural and right. "They are human," Kragha said with a shrug. "Humans fear what they do not understand. Orcs are the same, if I am honest. My clan would have killed you on sight if you had stumbled into our camp." "Would you have killed me?" Xavier asked. It was a question he had wondered about but never asked. Kragha was quiet for a long moment. "Before the attack, yes," she said finally. "I would have seen you as the enemy, as the people who had killed my father and my cousins. I would not have hesitated." She turned to look at him, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "But now I cannot imagine that, cannot imagine not knowing you." "You have changed something in me, Xavier. I do not know if that is good or bad, but it is true." Xavier's heart was beating faster. He reached out slowly and took her hand. It was large and calloused, the fingers scarred from a lifetime of combat, but it was also warm and real and perfect in his grip. "You have changed something in me too," he said quietly. "I look at you and I do not see an orc or an enemy. I just see Kragha. I see someone strong and brave and kind, someone who makes me laugh and makes me think and makes me want to be better." Kragha's fingers tightened around his. "Xavier, she stopped, searching for words. "I do not know what this is, this feeling. Orcs do not have romances like humans do. We mate for strength, for the good of the clan. We do not have this. This softness." "This is not softness," Xavier said. He raised their joined hands, pressing his forehead against her knuckles. "This is the strongest thing I have ever felt. And I do not care what it is called or how it is supposed to work. I only care that it is real." "It is real," Kragha whispered. "And it terrifies me." They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, neither speaking, both trying to process the enormity of what was forming between them. Eventually, Xavier stood and gently pulled Kragha to her feet. "It is late," he said. "We should sleep. Tomorrow is the first monthly report and we need to be ready." Kragha nodded. She had been sleeping in the main room since her arrival, Xavier giving her the space by the fire while he took his bedroom. But now, as he turned to go, she caught his hand again. "Stay," she said. "Just for a while. I do not want to be alone tonight." So Xavier stayed, sitting with her by the dying fire, her head eventually coming to rest on his shoulder as exhaustion overtook them both. He woke sometime in the middle of the night to find they had both slipped down to lie on the floor, curled together for warmth, Kragha's arm over his chest and his hand in her hair. He should have moved. It was improper, probably dangerous, definitely complicated. But instead, he simply closed his eyes and allowed himself to feel safe and content in a way he had not felt in years. The first monthly report was nerve-wracking. Xavier and Kragha stood before the council, and Kragha spoke in clear, measured tones about the work she had done, the progress on the farm, and her intentions to continue proving herself. Elder Thompson asked hostile questions, trying to trip her up or make her angry, but Kragha answered with patience and dignity. At the end, Mayor Garrett nodded slowly. "You have done well so far. Continue as you are." It was not an endorsement, but it was not a condemnation either, and Xavier counted it as a victory. Winter deepened, snow falling heavily and locking them into a small world of just the cabin and the barn. They worked together to care for the animals, to keep the paths clear, to maintain their stores of food. And in the long, dark evenings, they talked and shared stories and slowly, inevitably, fell deeper into whatever this was between them. Xavier told Kragha about his childhood, about the fever that took his parents, about his uncle's gruff kindness and stern lessons. Kragha told him about growing up in the mountains, about learning to fight from the age of 5, about the harsh beauty of orc culture where only the strong survived, but where there was a fierce loyalty among clan members. "You miss it?" Xavier asked one night. "Your old life?" Kragha considered the question seriously. "I miss the mountains," she said. "I miss the freedom of moving with the seasons, of not being bound to one place. But I do not miss the constant fighting, the endless vigilance, and I do not miss being alone among many. In my clan, I was just another warrior, just another spear arm. Here with you, I am Kragha. I am a person, not just a role." "You were always a person," Xavier said. "They just did not see it." "Neither did I," Kragha admitted. "Not until you showed me." The second monthly report went more smoothly than the first. Even Elder Thompson seemed less hostile, perhaps worn down by the evidence that Kragha was indeed no threat. Father Benedict went so far as to nod approvingly when Kragha mentioned helping to repair the fence around the church cemetery after a storm had knocked it down. "You are winning them over," Xavier said as they walked back to the cabin through the snow. "Slowly, but it is happening." "Perhaps," Kragha said. She sounded thoughtful rather than hopeful. "Or perhaps they are simply getting used to me being here. There is a difference between acceptance and tolerance." Xavier could not argue with that, but he chose to believe that progress was progress, no matter how small. As winter began to loosen its grip, and the first signs of spring appeared, Xavier realized with a start that he had fallen in love. It was not a sudden revelation, but a gradual understanding, the way one might realize the sun had risen without noticing the exact moment of dawn. He loved the way Kragha laughed at his jokes, even the bad ones. He loved her strength and her vulnerability, the way she could split firewood with casual ease, but carefully tended the small herb garden she had started in the kitchen window. He loved the sound of her voice, the way she said his name, the feeling of her hand in his. He was terrified to tell her. What if she did not feel the same way? What if she saw their closeness as simply friendship born of necessity? What if he ruined everything by speaking words that could not be taken back? But one evening in early spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Kragha turned to him and said, "I need to tell you something." Xavier's heart stuttered. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about the end of the season," Kragha said slowly. "About what happens when the council makes their final decision. And I have realized that no matter what they say, I do not want to leave. Not because of the farm or the safety, but because of you." Xavier stared at her, hardly daring to breathe. "What are you saying?" Kragha met his eyes, and in the fading light her amber gaze seemed to glow. "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Xavier Nolan. I do not know how it happened or when, but it is true. You have become my home more than any place or clan ever was." Relief and joy flooded through Xavier so intensely that he felt dizzy. "Kragha, I love you too. I have for weeks, maybe longer. I was just afraid to say it." Kragha laughed, a sound of pure happiness that Xavier had rarely heard from her. "We are both fools, then. Fools in love." Xavier reached for her, and she met him halfway, their kiss clumsy and perfect and full of all the emotion they had been holding back. Her tusks were strange against his mouth, but he found he loved even that, loved every part of her that was different and unique and absolutely Kragha. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever the council decides, we face it together. If you have to leave, I leave with you. I am not losing you." "You would give up your home for me?" Kragha asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Your land, your place in this world. You are my place in this world," Xavier said simply. "Everything else is just details." They spent that night together in the true sense, coming together with a passion and tenderness that felt like both a beginning and a homecoming. Xavier learned the landscape of Kragha's body, the scars that marked her skin, the strength in her muscles, the softness of her hair. Kragha explored him with equal reverence, her touches gentle despite her strength, her whispered words in the orcish language sounding like prayers. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in Xavier's bed, the window open to let in the cool spring air, and Xavier felt more complete than he ever had in his life. "I want to marry you," he said into the darkness. "I know that is probably impossible, that no priest would perform the ceremony and no town would recognize it, but I want you to know that in my heart, you are already my wife." Kragha was silent for a moment, then she rolled to face him, her expression serious. "Orcs do not marry like humans do. But we have a bonding ritual, a promise made before witnesses. It is sacred to us, binding for life." She touched his face gently. "I would bond with you, Xavier. I would make that promise." "Then we will do both," Xavier said, "your ritual and mine. And if no one recognizes it, that is their failure, not ours." Spring turned to summer, and the farm flourished under their combined efforts. Kragha proved to be a natural farmer, understanding the rhythms of the land in a way that complemented Xavier's more methodical approach. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, and in the evenings they planned and dreamed and loved. The third and fourth monthly reports were formalities. Even Elder Thompson had stopped objecting, though he still regarded Kragha with suspicion. The town remained wary but no longer hostile. Some people even began to nod in greeting when Kragha passed, a small gesture but a significant one. Then, in midsummer, everything changed. A rider came to the valley, a messenger from the northern forts, with news that an orc warband was moving south. They were large, aggressive, and burning human settlements in their path. The town immediately went into defensive preparations, calling up the militia and preparing for a possible siege. Xavier and Kragha heard the news from Mayor Garrett, who came to their farm personally to deliver it. "We will need every able body on the walls if they come," he said to Xavier. "And as for you," he turned to Kragha, "the council has decided you must be confined during the crisis, for everyone's safety." "You mean imprisoned," Kragha said flatly. "You do not trust me. Can you blame us?" Garrett said, though there was regret in his voice. "Your people are coming to attack us. How do we know you will not help them?" "Because I have been here for 8 months proving that I am not my people," Kragha said, anger finally breaking through her usual calm. "Because I have worked and bled and earned my place here. Because I love this town despite the fact that half of it still sees me as a monster. But most of all because I love Xavier, and I would die before I let harm come to him or his home." Garrett looked surprised, then uncomfortable. "I did not know you and Xavier were involved." "We are not just involved," Xavier said, moving to stand beside Kragha. "We are bonded, married in the ways that matter to us, and if you lock her up, you insult us both." "It is not an insult, it is a precaution," Garrett said, but he sounded less certain now. "It is prejudice," Xavier said. "You are proving that no matter what Kragha does, no matter how hard she tries, you will always see her as the enemy. Is that the kind of town you want to lead? One that judges people by their blood rather than their choices?" Garrett was silent for a long time, the conflict clear on his face. Finally, he sighed. "I will bring this to the council, but Xavier, if she stays free and something goes wrong, it will be on your head." "I accept that," Xavier said without hesitation. The council meeting that followed was tense and loud. Elder Thompson demanded Kragha be locked in the town's small jail. Captain Pierce argued that she could be useful, that an orc who knew how the war bands operated would be valuable for defense planning. Father Benedict supported Kragha's freedom, citing her months of good behavior. The other council members were divided. In the end, Mayor Garrett made the decision. Kragha will remain free, but she will be confined to Xavier's farm unless escorted by militia. If the war band attacks and she is proven to be in league with them, she will be executed immediately. If she helps defend the town, we will grant her permanent residency and full acceptance into our community. It was a gamble, but it was better than imprisonment. Xavier and Kragha returned to the farm and began their own preparations. Kragha taught Xavier about orc battle tactics, about how warbands moved and attacked, about their weaknesses and strengths. "They will come at night if they can," she said, drawing maps in the dirt of the yard. "They will try to fire the buildings first, create chaos, then attack in the confusion. If we can prevent the fires, we can force them into direct combat, and that gives us better odds." "How many warriors will there be?" Xavier asked. "A warband this size, moving this aggressively, at least 50, maybe more, and they will be experienced fighters, not young or weak." Kragha's expression was grim. "This will be bad, Xavier. Very bad." They worked with Captain Pierce to implement Kragha's suggestions, wetting down buildings, preparing fire brigades, setting up watch posts that could not be easily approached without being seen. The captain was grudgingly impressed by Kragha's knowledge, and word spread through the militia that the orc woman was helping plan the defense. The warband arrived 3 days later, just after sunset. Xavier was on the walls when the alarm bells rang, and he saw the fires spring up at the edge of the farmlands to the north. The orcs were burning fields as they advanced, creating smoke and confusion. "They are testing us," Kragha said beside him. She had been allowed on the walls at Captain Pierce's insistence, and she stood now in borrowed leather armor, a borrowed sword at her side. "They want to see how we respond." "How should we respond?" Pierce asked. He had given up his pride in favor of survival, and he listened to Kragha now as if she were any other experienced soldier. "Do not chase them into the smoke," Kragha said. "That is what they want. Keep the defense tight, focus on protecting the buildings. They will probe for weakness, and when they do not find it, they will either retreat or commit to a full assault." The orcs probed all night, small groups darting in to test the defenses, setting fires that the townsfolk quickly extinguished. Xavier fought alongside his neighbors, people who had shunned him for months now fighting at his back. And Kragha stood at the center of the defense, calling out warnings, directing responses, and occasionally meeting orc attackers with her blade. At one point, An orc warrior broke through the line and came at her, shouting something in the orcish language. Kragha shouted back, her voice hard and commanding, and the warrior hesitated. They exchanged words, too fast for Xavier to follow, and then Kragha pointed her sword at the warrior and said something final. The warrior backed away, disappearing into the smoke. "What was that?" Xavier asked when he reached her side. "He recognized me," Kragha said. Her face was pale beneath the green. "He was from a clan allied with mine. I told him I was dead to the clans now, that I had chosen humans over my people. I told him to tell his chieftain that any who come here will face me as an enemy." Xavier felt his throat tighten. She had just cut herself off from her entire race, declared herself an enemy to the only people who had ever been her family. And she had done it for him, for this town, for the life they had built together. "Kragha," he began, but she shook her head. "Later. Right now we fight." The full assault came just before dawn, when everyone was exhausted and defenses were weakest. The orcs came in force, more than 50 warriors, hitting the eastern wall with brutal efficiency. The fighting was desperate and bloody, the town's militia barely holding against the onslaught. Xavier lost track of Kragha in the chaos, and fear for her cut through him sharper than any blade. He fought mechanically, trying to spot her green skin in the mass of combatants, until he heard a roar of challenge from the center of the fighting. Kragha had engaged the warband's chieftain, a massive orc with bone armor and a sword that looked like it could cleave a man in half. They fought with a skill and ferocity that cleared a space around them, both sides pausing to watch their champions clash. The chieftain was stronger, but Kragha was faster. She ducked under a swing that would have taken her head off and stabbed upward, her blade finding the gap in the bone armor. The chieftain roared and backhanded her, sending her sprawling, then raised his sword for the killing blow. Xavier did not think. He charged forward, raising his own sword and screaming a challenge. The chieftain turned, surprised, and that moment of hesitation was enough. Kragha surged up from the ground and drove her blade into the chieftain's throat. The massive orc fell, and the warband faltered. Kragha stood over the body, raised her bloody sword, and shouted something in Orcish. It sounded like a combination of victory cry and funeral rite. The warband broke. Without their chieftain, with their champion killed by one of their own people who had chosen humans, they lost the will to fight. They retreated into the dawn, leaving their dead and wounded behind. The town erupted in cheers, exhausted and relieved and victorious. Xavier stumbled to Kragha's side and pulled her into his arms, not caring who saw or what they thought. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, checking her for wounds. "I am fine," Kragha said. She was shaking, the aftermath of battle and emotion overwhelming her. "I killed him. I killed an orc chieftain. I can never go back now. I am truly outcast." "You saved us," Xavier said fiercely. "You saved everyone. You are a hero." "I am a traitor to my people," Kragha said, but there were tears on her face. "But I would do it again. I would choose you again every time." They stood like that, holding each other in the growing light, while around them the town began to recover and rebuild. The council meeting that followed was very different from the others. Xavier and Kragha stood before them once more, but this time the atmosphere was not hostile or even merely tolerant. Mayor Garrett stood and cleared his throat. "Kragha," he said formally, "on behalf of this town and its people, I offer our deepest gratitude for your service in our defense. You fought with courage and skill, and you saved many lives. As promised, we grant you permanent residency and full acceptance into this community. You are one of us now." Kragha bowed her head, overcome with emotion. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I will continue to serve and protect this town for as long as I live here." Even Elder Thompson nodded grudgingly. You proved yourself, orc woman. I was wrong about you. Father Benedict stepped forward. I have been thinking, he said, about what I said when you first came here about orcs being soulless. I was wrong. I have seen your compassion, your sacrifice, your love. Those are the marks of a soul, not of a monster. And if I was wrong about that, then perhaps the church has been wrong about many things. I would be honored to perform a marriage ceremony for you and Xavier, if you would have me. Xavier looked at Kragha, and she looked at him, and the joy in her eyes was answer enough. We would be honored, Xavier said, but we would like to include an orc bonding ritual as well, if that is acceptable. It is more than acceptable, Father Benedict said with a smile. Let us blend your traditions and ours and create something new and beautiful. The wedding was held in late summer, in the field where Xavier had first found Kragha bleeding and desperate. The whole town attended, not out of obligation but out of genuine goodwill. Father Benedict performed the human ceremony, and then Kragha led Xavier through the orc bonding ritual, which involved the exchange of carved tokens and spoken promises in both their languages. I promise to stand with you in all seasons, Kragha said in Orcish, then repeated in human tongue. To defend you with my strength, to support you with my wisdom, to love you with my whole heart. You are my clan now, my home, my everything. I promise to honor you as my equal and my partner, Xavier said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to choke him. To see you as you are, not as the world tells me you should be. To love you without reservation, without fear, without end. You are my heart, my home, my reason for being. They sealed the bonding with a kiss, and the crowd cheered, and Xavier felt like his heart might burst from happiness. They built a life together over the years that followed. The farm prospered, yielding better harvests each season. Kragha became a respected member of the community, teaching the young men and women who joined the militia, helping with heavy labor, and slowly winning over even the most stubborn holdouts with her quiet competence and genuine kindness. Word of the town that had accepted an orc spread, and slowly, cautiously, other orcs began to appear at the borders. Some were outcasts like Kragha, seeking refuge from the violence of clan life. Others were simply curious, wanting to see if the stories of peaceful coexistence were true. The town remained cautious, but with Kragha as a bridge, they began to accept these newcomers in small numbers. Xavier and Kragha's relationship deepened and matured. They had arguments, as all couples do, usually about small things like whose turn it was to muck out the barn or how much salt to put in the stew. But they also had moments of profound joy and connection. Nights spent talking under the stars, mornings waking in each other's arms, the simple pleasure of working side by side toward shared goals. 3 years after their wedding, Kragha came to Xavier with news that both terrified and thrilled them both. She was pregnant. It should have been impossible, the healers said, for humans and orcs to produce offspring together. But life had a way of finding paths where none seemed to exist. The pregnancy was difficult, Kragha's body struggling with the biological complications of carrying a child that was half human. Xavier hovered over her constantly, driving her crazy with his protectiveness, until she finally snapped at him to either be useful or leave her alone. I am not made of glass, she growled at him when he tried to prevent her from lifting a sack of grain. I am an orc. I am stronger than you will ever be. Stop treating me like an invalid. I am sorry, Xavier said, properly chastened. I am just worried. Kragha's expression softened. I know. And I love you for it. But you must trust me to know my own limits. I will tell you if I need help. The baby was born in the spring, a healthy boy with his mother's green skin and his father's brown eyes. They named him Cross, a name that worked in both Orcish and human tongue. The town celebrated his birth as if he were everyone's child, which in a way he was. He was a symbol of what they had become, a community that looked beyond old hatreds to build something new. As Xavier held his son for the first time, looking down at the perfect tiny face that was a blend of both his parents, he thought back to that day when he had locked the door on an angry mob. He had not known then what he was choosing, had not understood the full implications of his decision. He had simply known that leaving Kragha to die or to be killed was wrong. That one choice had led to everything: love, family, peace, a future that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. And as he looked at Kragha, saw her watching him with their son with an expression of such profound love and contentment, he knew he would make the same choice again without hesitation. "What are you thinking?" Kragha asked softly. "I am thinking about doors," Xavier said. "About the ones we close and the ones we open, about the choices that change everything." Kragha smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that still made his heart skip. "I am glad you locked the door that day," she said. "I am glad you chose me over them." "I did not choose you over them," Xavier said, moving to sit beside her on the bed, their son cradled between them. "I chose love over fear, and that made all the difference." Outside, the sun was setting over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The wheat fields swayed in the evening breeze, and in the town below, lights were beginning to appear in windows as families gathered for their evening meals. Somewhere in those houses were people who had once wanted Kragha dead, who had demanded Xavier throw her out and let her die. But now those same people brought gifts for the baby, offered congratulations, and saw Kragha as one of their own. It had not been an easy transformation. It had taken time, patience, and more than a little stubbornness from both Xavier and Kragha. But it had happened, and that gave Xavier hope for the future. If one town could change, could learn to see past old prejudices and embrace something new, then perhaps others could as well. Perhaps the long war between humans and orcs might someday end, not in conquest but in understanding. "Do you ever regret it?" Xavier asked suddenly. "Leaving your people, your old life, becoming an outcast?" Kragha considered the question seriously, as she always did. "Sometimes I miss the mountains," she admitted. "I miss the freedom of that life, the simplicity of knowing who you were and what was expected of you. But I do not regret my choice. How could I when it led to you, to this?" She gestured to encompass their son, the cabin, the life they had built. "I traded one family for another, and I believe I got the better deal." Xavier leaned over and kissed her, careful not to jostle the baby between them. "I got the better deal," he said. "I got you. We both got lucky," Kragha said. "Now stop being sentimental and help me figure out how to feed this child. Your human books say one thing, but my orc instincts say another, and I do not know which to trust." They spent the rest of the evening figuring out parenthood together, making mistakes and laughing about them, learning as they went. It was not so different from everything else they had done together, Xavier reflected. They had learned to be partners, to be spouses, to be members of a community that had not wanted them. They would learn to be parents too. As night fell and they finally settled into bed, Cross sleeping peacefully in the cradle Xavier had carved with his own hands, Kragha turned to Xavier and said quietly, "I never thought I would have this. A home, a family, peace. I thought I would die young in battle, forgotten and unmourned. Instead, I have you and our son and a whole town that calls me friend. It feels like a dream sometimes." "If it is a dream, we are both dreaming it," Xavier said. He pulled her close, and she fitted against him perfectly, as she always did. "And I never want to wake up." "Then we will not," Kragha said. "We will stay in this dream forever and we will be happy." And they were. Through the years that followed, through the challenges and joys that came with raising a child who was neither fully human nor fully orc, but something entirely new, through the continued slow transformation of the town and the surrounding region as more orcs and humans learned to live together, through everything, they were happy. Their story became a legend in the valley, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. The human man who locked his door against his own people to save an orc woman. The orc woman who fought her own kind to protect the humans who had given her refuge. The love that bridged two worlds and started a new one. But for Xavier and Kragha, it was simply their life. Extraordinary to others, perhaps, but to them it was just the daily reality of choosing each other every day in small ways and large. It was the mundane magic of shared meals and shared work, of arguments and reconciliations, of watching their son grow and wondering what kind of world he would build with his own choices. Years passed, and Cross grew into a strong, intelligent young man who had his mother's courage and his father's compassion. More half-orc children were born in the valley, a new generation that did not see the divisions their parents had been born into. The town expanded, welcoming more orcs and becoming known throughout the region as a place where anyone could find refuge and acceptance if they were willing to work and live in peace. Xavier and Kragha grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies bearing the marks of a life of hard work and hard-won peace. But they remained devoted to each other, still holding hands as they walked through the fields in the evening, still finding joy in each other's company after decades together. One evening, when they were both well into their 50s and Cross had children of his own, Xavier and Kragha sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset, as they had done countless times before. Kragha's hand was in Xavier's, warm and familiar, and everything was peaceful. "Do you remember that first night?" Xavier asked. "When the whole town was outside demanding I throw you out?" "I remember," Kragha said. "I remember thinking you were a fool for locking that door. I remember being certain we would both die." "I was terrified," Xavier admitted. "I had no idea what I was doing or what would happen. I just knew I could not let them hurt you." "You saved my life that night," Kragha said. "In more ways than one. You gave me a reason to live, a future I never thought possible." "You gave me the same," Xavier said. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her scarred knuckles. "Everything good in my life came from the moment I locked that door. Everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. In the town below, lights appeared in windows, families gathering together for the evening. Some of those families were human, some were orc, and some, like Xavier and Kragha's, were both. It was not a perfect world, not yet, but it was better than it had been. And that was enough. "I love you," Kragha said quietly, the words still carrying weight even after all these years. "I love you too," Xavier said. "Always have, always will." As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, they went inside together, closing the door on another day of their shared life. The same door Xavier had locked so many years ago, shutting out hatred and fear, choosing instead to build something better. And behind that locked door, in the warmth and safety of the home they had created, Xavier and Kragha had found everything they never knew they needed. Acceptance, belonging, purpose, and a love that had changed not just their lives but an entire community. The whole town had told him to throw her out, but Xavier had looked at the orc girl and locked the door behind them instead. And in doing so, he had unlocked a future neither of them could have imagined. A future filled with love and hope and the promise that sometimes the most important doors are the ones we choose to close.